BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your sports betting needs. Baseball season is in full swing, and we're into the home stretch for NBA, NHL playoffs. It has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from Major League Baseball, NHL, UFC, and more, BetOnline remains the number one online source for all of your sports wagering information. In between games, just head on over to the BetOnline casino with all of the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengals podcast with yours truly, Solomon Wilcots, and our Bleav in Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, we finally now get to look at the draft. We can look and see what the Cincinnati Bengals were able to do to add those final pieces to their team. First of all, I want to ask you, how you doing? Did you survive it all?
I had a great weekend. I guess the worst thing that could happen to me is I would get picked, and I did not get picked, so I guess I'll keep doing this.
Well, you're right. You want to stay out of the fray. Look, let's go ahead and just kind of provide some context here. Last season, 2004, Cincinnati Bengals defense, they allowed the fourth most points of any team in the NFL, gave up 33.1 points per game over the 17-game regular season schedule. They ranked 21st, when it came to, the ability to get sacks on the opposing quarterback, 22nd in pressures generated, and 28th in explosive plays allowed, 15 yards or more. So clearly their job was to improve on defense, and that's putting pressure on the opposing quarterback as well as having better coverage. We also know they needed to improve upon the offensive line. Let's start with talking about the first round pick, 17th overall, Shemar Stewart, Texas A&M. Everyone wants to talk about the 4.5 sacks during his college career. What are the Bengals saying about the lack of production for their first round selection?
What this Bengals decision came down to wasn't traits versus production because, Donovan Ezeraku and Mike Green were edges that had a lot of production. I don't get the sense that's where the Bengals were looking. Where it came down to was traits versus positional value. When you look at the guys they were picking between with that first pick, it wasn't a bunch of defensive ends. It were guys who would have played more positions of need, who might have played more snaps in 2025, but didn't have the upside that a Shemar Stewart had. So what they see is a guy who has the ability to, he'll probably get the chance to take over for Trey Hendrickson in 2026, plus the versatility to make an impact versus the run and the pass in a rotational role, getting pretty close to starting level snaps in 2025. And this was probably going to be the Bengals' last chance over the next 3 years, assuming they stay good, to get a defensive end who could do all of this, and they didn't pass up on that opportunity.
Hey, look, going in, I remember you saying that the Bengals could not afford to do the best player available, that they had to sort of strike a balance between best available and going after the needs. Was Shemar Stewart the best edge rusher available when they went on the clock at 17th overall in your mind?
He was. And I think an important thing to stress too is kind of the other guys at that position were true edge rushers. Shemar Stewart's a defensive end. He has the size, he has the versatility, he has the physicality to truly make an impact as an end, not just a pin your ears back and rush, go get him kind of guy. So the complete package is what stood out for the Bengals. It's the exact type of skill set that Al Golden wants at that position, short and long term. Are there guys who could help the Bengals more in 2025? Probably, but the Bengals took their biggest swing, and a swing on development with Shemar Stewart.
This is a huge swing because the initial response is that he's got all these dimensions: height, weight, size, speed, arm span, as another Texas A&M Aggie, a guy who went first overall in the 2017 draft. We know him well here in Cincinnati, and that's Myles Garrett, right? He played at Texas A&M. But when he finished his career, I think he had 26 sacks over the course of his college career. And I do think it's hard for some people to get past the lack of production. Let's face it, we need another edge rusher. opposite of Trey Hendrickson, who can produce in the sack category. Myles Murphy is another guy the Bengals are waiting to see his sack production go up. But when people see 37 games played in college and only 4.5 sacks, 1.5 sack per season, it's really hard, Charlie, to get past the lack of production. Because typically, if you can't get production at the collegiate level in one statistical category, why should we believe that you're going to all of a sudden become a really phenomenal player in that category at the professional level in the NFL? What are the Bengals saying about the lack of production?
What they'll tell you about that is a couple things. First, and give him credit here. Shemar Stewart was on one of the most talented defensive lines in all college football, and he led the line in pressures, and he consistently created havoc in the backfield, even though he didn't finish those plays. So for a Bengals defense that created zero pressure last year outside of Trey Hendrickson, they needed that too. Yes, they need sacks, but they also needed pressures. And number two, when you look at kind of some schematic stuff because of that incredible defensive line at Texas A&M, so many quick passes, very few true dropbacks, not a whole lot of opportunities, plus the attention that Stewart was receiving as well did help set up some opportunities for others. So, you can talk yourself into this narrative, but you also have to talk yourself into the narrative of the Bengals doing something they haven't in years, and that's developing a defensive piece with all of these traits into a true impact starter. Bengals haven't done that, you can argue, since 2018 or 2019. So the Bengals obviously have to have a better plan to develop this guy.
So the Bengals go and they draft. This is an Al Golden special. They use their 2nd round pick and their 4th round pick on 2 linebackers. Demetrius Knight in the 2nd round, linebacker from South Carolina. I love his size at 6'2", 235 pounds. And then in the 4th round, Barrett Carter from Clemson. He's a smaller linebacker, but speed seems to be his calling card at 6 feet, 231. There seems to be some difference in the skill set, but they wanted to get younger. They wanted to be more diversified at the linebacker position. By taking these 2 players, they seem to have achieved that. What's your breakdown of Demetrius Knight Jr. and Barrett Carter?
Demetrius Knight's a day one starter. He's a guy who brings a speed, a physicality, and kind of an explosiveness. While he wasn't necessarily a backfield production type guy, there's a downhill ability that the Bengals just lacked because Jermaine Pratt's gone and because Oren Burks is a 4th linebacker and they didn't have anybody else. And Barrett Carter, almost think of him as someone who plays a completely different position. Knight, you'll see even kind of down on the line of scrimmage, maybe even as a bigger end in some point. You'll see him doing a lot of that as a true outside linebacker. Barrett Carter's basically Logan Wilson's backup, and the Bengals didn't have one of those either. And a 4th round pick for a backup at the position that is the quarterback of your defense is a valuable thing. He's fast. They'll tell you 24 pass breakups last year, comfortable in coverage, both elite intangibles as a part of it too. But Knight they brought in to start, and Carter they brought in to be a premium backup at an important position.
The Bengals over the past several years have really went heavy in free agency and adding to the offensive line. You and I both know there's a time, of course, Amarius Mims was the 1st round pick last year. So they started to provide some youth on the offensive line, I think starting with Amarius Mims. And this year they used a 3rd round pick on an offensive guard, Dylan Fairchild from Georgia. And then the offensive tackle from the Miami Hurricanes, Jalen Rivers, in the 5th round. What do you know about both guys? They take the guard in the 3rd round and take the tackle in the 5th round, adding more youth and talent to the offensive line.
Here was the defining decision from a draft strategy perspective for the Bengals. In round 2, they could have taken Tate Ratledge, guard from Georgia. Then they probably would have taken Barrett Carter in round 3. And then in round 4, they would have either gotten a linebacker, maybe like Jack Simon, or one of the pass rushing defensive tackles left on the board, maybe Josh Farmer. Instead, what they did is obviously they really, really, really liked Knight. They took him in round 2. Yeah. What ended up working out for them was they liked Fairchild pretty similarly to how they liked Tate Ratledge. So they still got a guy who they view as a day one starting guard in Dylan Fairchild. I feel very comfortable with him being a starter. I think there's a polish that comes with his game. There's obviously a physicality. Statistically, he profiled great in pass protection. And then Jalen Rivers, he might get a shot to dabble in the right guard competition with Fairchild playing on the left side. But really what he is he'll be their backup tackle primarily. That allows Cody Ford to focus on right guard. I think now making Ford the favorite to be the right guard because he won't have to split his time practicing between guard and tackle. Rivers, though, has a spot on the everyday active 8 as a guy who can be your swing tackle and then also fill in a guard in a pinch. He fills out that depth chart nicely.
I got to tell you, Charlie, I wanted us to take a running back a little bit higher. There were 25 running backs taken in this year's draft class. That goes to show you, we had to let you know how much the running game became a bigger part of the NFL in 2024. We had 19 teams that ran the ball more in 2024 than who had run it in 2023. I've talked to a lot of coaches. They believe that the run game is becoming a much more integral part, particularly when you look at the team that won the Super Bowl. Philadelphia Eagles was the only team in the NFL last year that ran the ball more than they threw it. They had a 51% run play percentage. They ran the ball over 500 times, over 500 rushing attempts last year. There was only 4 teams that did that. The others were, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, Detroit Lions, and the Green Bay Packers. All 4 teams went to the playoffs, and one of them won a Super Bowl. So I'm thinking, man, we got to have power to our run game. I would have loved to get Cam Scatterboo, who went to the Giants in the 4th round. We end up with Taj Brooks, running back from Texas Tech in the 6th round, 5'9", 214. What do you make of him? How does he fit in the construct of the offense the Cincinnati Bengals have?
The good news for you is that since this was the deepest running back class in years, Brooks is probably a 4th round type player who just fell because there were about 1 million running backs who were kind of in that range or earlier this season. Brooks is, to me, the perfect complement to Chase Brown. I think the Bengals just found the number 2 running back of the future. What I love is Brooks almost exclusively played out of the shotgun. He'll feel right at home in Cincinnati. He's confident in his hands. He says he has the best hands in the class. Then his biggest strength is he'll be just what he really does best is just an efficient between the tackles, get downhill, get you 5 with some short yardage potential as well with the way he's kind of a bruiser. Every running back snap that doesn't go to Chase Brown this year will just be about getting Chase Brown a breather. That's how valuable Chase Brown is in this offense. Brown, give him as many carries and as many of those snaps as you possibly can. But to have a nice complementary piece in Brooks as well as, Piron and Moss, this is by far the best running back depth that Zach Taylor's ever had in Cincinnati.
Zach Moss, Samaje Perine, I absolutely love the guy. I think he is our short yardage goal line guy. If I'm not correct, he's the guy that can convert. I don't want them to overuse Chase Brown. There was a couple of games last year where I felt that later in games, you remember the one on the road at Baltimore, you get stripped of the ball. That turned that game. I don't care what anybody says. The Bengals are going in to put the Ravens away, and they take the ball away. It turned the game around. Of course, we had other opportunities to win it, but you and I both know that was a game changer. Him getting hurt at the end of the Denver game almost ended up being a game changer. It's one of the reasons why the game went into overtime. We have to be able to put teams away running the football. We're going to score a lot of points. The Bengals are going to score a lot of points with Joe Burrow and the weapons that he has. Talk to me about how good is the backfield in terms of the runners to be able to get the tough yardage late in games, short yardage, goal line, red zone, to not have to throw the ball to put some of these games away, but still not put the defense back out on the field.
Well, I think that's Chase Brown too. I think Chase Brown is a true do-it-all back in this offense. Now, again, so is Joe Mixon, and you need compliments around Joe Mixon to make sure you're not using and overexposing Chase Brown, which they 1,000% did last year. And the reason they had to overexpose him is because once Zach Moss was hurt, they might as well have put you and me in a backup running back. They were rotating Trevion Williams, who in his 6th year was making some missed assignments. Then they bench him for Kendall Milton. And Kendall Milton, he's still around, but he was not the answer. How bad were things at depth at running back last year? The Bengals made a trade deadline move, adding a player for the first time in the history of the franchise. That's how bad your running back depth was last season. So how do you respond to that? You build running back depth, and that helps Chase Brown. That helps your depth. That helps the offense as a whole. They will run the ball. more this year, and they have they have multiple guys who can, one, do it, and two, fill in if one of them's hurt.
Well, that's going to do it for our breakdown of the Cincinnati Bengals 2025 draft class. I think, Charlie, I think in the end, this draft class is going to be graded on a couple of things, right? Shemar Stewart, his impact on the defensive line and the ability to produce right away. I think given where they're at right now with Trey Hendrickson, that negotiation is still taking place. They're going to need, I think they need a real game changer, someone who has a tremendous presence up front on this defense. Either it's got to come from him, it's got to come from one of the linebackers. Demetrius Knight Jr. could be that guy. They need someone that this defense can rally around, is going to provide not only leadership, but the kind of production that becomes a difference-making sort of component and add some physicality to the defense. I think the offensive linemen, the two offensive linemen they added, can we shore up our position in the middle of that offensive line where we have a good run blocking unit and good protection up the middle for Joe Burrow? Your thoughts, one last statement about the entire 2025 draft class for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Well, I don't think you can talk about this draft class without talking about what they didn't address, and that's defensive tackle and safety. They remain weaknesses on this roster, specifically from a pass rush standpoint at defensive tackle. They didn't enter this draft saying, we need to fill every need they have, because maybe you have so many needs that you can't fill all of them in a single draft class. But those weaknesses might show up in January. But they're betting on the upside of Shemar Stewart, plus the depth they felt they needed at linebacker and in the trenches on the line. They're counting on that being enough to give the Bengals enough to support maybe the best offense in football.
And now let's go around the league, because I think we would be remiss if at the time of this recording, just days after the 2025 draft has been completed, everyone is talking about the slide of Shedeur Sanders down the draft board into the 5th round, where he was saved from even a further fall by the Cleveland Browns. And it should not be missed that the Cleveland Browns did the rare thing. They took 2 quarterbacks in the same draft. There are 2 rounds earlier in the 3rd round, they had taken Dillon Gabriel, who I think is a phenomenal quarterback. He's just small in stature, but this guy can play in rhythm. I know Kevin Stefanski loves his addition, but what happened? What are you hearing as to why Shedeur ended up falling this far? And why would the Cleveland Browns take 2 quarterbacks in the same draft?
As much as a proponent as I am for drafting 2 quarterbacks, I'm not a proponent of drafting 2 quarterbacks when you already have 2 quarterbacks who you'd like to get snaps to. And I think the Browns are a bad fit for Shedeur Sanders. Part of it is just a logistical reason. I mean, clearly they value Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. That's obvious.
That's right.
I think they could win the most games in 2025 with Joe Flacco. I think that Joe Flacco is a guy who's going to get reps. I think you can make the case for Kenny Pickett being a guy who they'd like to give an opportunity to. You could speak this a million times better than I can, but I know this for a fact. You can only get 2 quarterbacks significant reps in training camp. And if you're mixing and matching or shuffling in and out, you're shortchanging absolutely everybody. So if Shedeur at a minimum is below Gabriel on the depth chart, if Flacco's a guy you feel like you want to, 1, win more games, and 2, be able to run a professional veteran training camp, which there's value in. Well, now Shedeur's 3rd on the depth chart. You can make the case he's 4th behind Kenny Pickett. I just don't understand how Shedeur gets the reps he needs to be put in a position to succeed. And then I think we can all agree they'll give him a shot in a game eventually this year, but he won't have any of the practice reps to draw back on because of the starting position he's beginning this season on the depth chart at.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of conversation as to why Shedeur Sanders fell in this draft. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to try to provide some clarity around this. And then I want to hear from you, Charlie, because you're close to a lot of things that are being discussed. You and I were together in Indianapolis during the scouting combine. And I think we need to clear the air, because I do think people think there's somehow some cabal of a collusion surrounding what's happened with Shedeur Sanders. I want to start by at least providing some facts. Here's what we do know. That going into the draft process, his father and a friend of mine, and Deion Sanders, who will remember, Shedeur attended a place where it's my alma mater, where I went to the University of Colorado, a school I love dearly, a place in Boulder that I love dearly. I still vacation there. I'm still close to the program. I'm still close to the university there, and have done projects for the university over the years since I finished school there. I can tell you right now, coming into the draft, Shedeur Sanders said there are some teams we don't want you drafting them. Some teams stay away. You heard him. He was on the record for saying that there were some teams that he did not want to draft Shedeur. And it was more about the marketing opportunities at small town. There's big markets, there's small markets in the NFL. Most people don't talk about that stuff. But when you're looking for media opportunities and you're looking to expand your brand, these are conversations that are had, let's face it. But Shedeur was on the record for making those statements. And it's not one that you can easily quiet once the draft starts. Those things resonate with teams. I do think there were people in the scouting community and the personnel departments and general managers that felt offended because there's a player who think that he can operate outside of the normal process. And what occurred in Indianapolis at the scouting combine, where when you're interviewing with multiple teams, it's like speed dating. 10 minutes with each team, you're going to, knock out these interviews. And it's been reported that Shedeur could have handled those interviews a lot better, particularly with teams that he didn't necessarily want to be drafted by or he didn't think were a good fit. And even Shedeur has now said that he could have gone through the pre-draft process and handled it better. Okay. So you pack all that into the fact that his dad, Deion's operating as his agent, that there are some teams that compared notes, right, amongst the scouting community and said, hey, how did he do in your meeting? Well, when he met with us, he wasn't respectful of the process. I don't think he wanted our team to draft him. And then another team is saying, well, when he came through with us, he was great. He put on a whole different perspective, a whole different attitude. You and I both know teams they share notes. And what they don't want to feel like they're getting one guy, but with another team that he behaved in a different manner. And what teams tend to do is they tend to shy away from players who are inconsistent in how they carry themselves and how they present themselves. If you feel like you're going to be dealing with more than just, Shedeur Sanders, and you got to deal with his whole team, the cameras, Deion, and the whole persona that comes with it, teams are going to shy away. And for those reasons, I think not just one or two things, I think for multiple things, I think that's why he slid. And it took the Cleveland Browns in the 5th round. And I got to tell you, I don't think the general manager and the head coach looked excited when they were talking about as to the reasons why they drafted him. So I do think there's still an uphill battle here. But you and I both know that in the National Football League, the community of scouts and personnel people, they don't want to feel like any player feels like he's above the process, that he gets to operate outside of the process and still think that he's going to be accepted with open arms, going to be drafted at a high level. When you're drafted at a high level, teams are making an investment. The lower level that you're drafted, it's less of an investment. And I think he went in the 5th round because teams were more comfortable with making less of an investment in Shedeur Sanders, even though I think some teams feel that he's a much better player than a 5th round grade.
If anyone in the league wanted him to be their starting quarterback, he would have been picked on day 2.
That's
and
right.
All of this shows that no one wanted him to be their starting quarterback, and the Browns were willing to take a shot with a very low risk. And when the entire league comes to that consensus, it puts Shedeur in a position to prove the entire world wrong, and that'll be one of the defining stories probably in the next 4 years of the NFL, is Shedeur's journey to try to accomplish that. But clearly, everything that happened led to a universal, unanimous decision by the league about how they viewed him. Again, maybe they've all got it wrong, and that'll be fascinating to see. Yeah. But certainly that's how the process played out.
It is how the process played out. And now I always say draft day is not the final story. It's the beginning of a journey. for many of these players, whether you were drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals or if you're Shedeur Sanders and you're going to Cleveland. Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick, and we see how that turned out. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago in 2022, Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft was a guy by the name of Brock Purdy. That very year, he took him to the NFC Championship game. He's since taken him to the Super Bowl. So it's not about when you were drafted. It's about what are you going to do with the opportunity. Every single one of these players have a chance to write their own narrative. They get to write their own history. But you can't do it alone, right? You only can do that by working with your coaching staff, by working with your teammates, working with the people in the building to become a better player, to fit into the framework of what the organization has planned. Remember, no one person is bigger than the team. If you're trying to be bigger than the team, it's not going to work out. Not even Tom Brady took that approach. Not even Brock Purdy took that approach. You got to work within the construct of the team, working with your coaches to become the best player that you can be. That's what I have done. That's what Charlie Goldsmith has done. And that's the only reason why you get to be a Bengals insider like Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, we appreciate you. Look forward to talking to you again next week. Everyone, we thank you for joining us right here on the Bleav in Bengals podcast. We'll see you next time.